First of all, I want to say thank you all for joining us today while we report out on what we saw in Eagle Pass. I am joined, as you can see on the screen, by Josh Rubin, the founder of Witness at the Border, and Witness at the Border team members Lee Goodman, coming to us from Chicago, and Julie Swift from New Mexico, and driving in her car, America Garcia Graywall from Eagle Pass. As I said, we're going to use Zoom meeting today instead of our usual Zoom webinar and see how that works for us. And when we get to the Q&A portion of this, if you'll just either raise your hand or post your question in the chat, we will try to answer as many questions as we can. We are scheduled today to be on for 60 minutes, so we will finish whatever time period you're in. If you're on Eastern time, that will be 6 p.m. Eastern time, but we will go a little bit over till 6:15 if we have questions. Our agenda today is to get some reflections from the panel members, then have a Q&A so we can get your participation. And then we will conclude. Sarah Towell, who is on the Witness at the Border team, is going to talk for a few minutes about her soon-to-be released book called Crossing the Line, Finding America in the Borderlands. So don't sign off early because you'll want to hear from Sarah when we finish the Q&A. Before we get into reflections, I wanted to just spend a couple minutes and talk about why did we go to Eagle Pass? Why did we organize this vigil in Eagle Pass? For those of you who were able to join us for the workshop in Ajo, you'll recall that one of the questions that we asked at the workshop is, what do we do next? What's next for Witness? Where should we focus? What should we try to accomplish? And there was an overwhelming response and feeling that we really needed to be in Eagle Pass. If we reflect back to what was happening in mid-January, which was the timing of when we were in Eagle Pass, we had recently heard about a mother and her small children drowning in the river. We were getting generally bad news about Operation Lone Star. And so we left Ajo with the idea that we really needed to look more into Eagle Pass and whether we should have a presence there. Since I live in Texas and I'm relatively close, that's close means a 7.5 hour drive from Dallas to Eagle Pass. I made a scouting trip to Eagle Pass to see what that would look like. What would it mean to establish a Witness vigil in Eagle Pass? That's when I met America. And we asked the question, of the locals, would you welcome us? Do you think that our presence would do some good? And the overwhelming response was, yes, we would like you to come. So we set the dates, April 10th through 24th. And in that period of 15 days, we had a total of 18 witnesses from 12 states and from Mexico. And we endured everything from hot weather to cold weather, windy weather. And I'm going to turn to the panel now to talk a little bit about their reflections. I'm going to start with you, Josh. Now that you've been home for almost 2 weeks, what are your reflections and what is it that you can't stop thinking about?
Yeah, well, coming home, I guess we've done a few of these things, right? And coming home for me gets harder and harder, I think, because I can't really shake what I see and I don't really understand it. In a lot of ways, like Julie says, everything is upside down and nothing makes sense. What's going on there doesn't make sense to regular people, but everybody's caught up in this drama that has a lot of kind of show business characteristics. The huge stage that's been set there, the ridiculous piling of junk rail cars, concertina wire on the river, insertion of concrete blocks and buoys into the river. Those are, and the entire town, by the way, invaded and occupied. Basically, the town is an occupied town. It's occupied by Operation Lone Star, and helping Operation Lone Star are troops of all kinds. It couldn't take place without federal okay. Something to keep in mind. If the federal government didn't say that this was okay, they could stop this in a second. They decided not to, and there are complicated reasons behind that. I think Lee will get into later. So we went to Eagle Pass, knowing, having learned from Carla's advanced work and from America, that we wouldn't be able to get to the bank on the American side. So where were we going to go? What were we going to do? And we had this idea, and it was an entirely experimental idea that we couldn't conduct until I was down there. And so we all got down there. And that was, let's go to the Mexican side. Because another thing that came out of that AJO conference was, hey, the borders are all over the place. But we've been standing on one side and looking at it from that side. So it was an interesting idea to us, since circumstances had put this problem in our way, all the rail cars and all the concertina wire and all the troops that had basically stolen hundreds and hundreds of yards and acres from the town of Eagle Pass. Forced by that, we decided we would cross the bridge and see what would happen if we took our banners, which we prepared in advance, a big witness at the border banner, and a Give Back Shelby Park banner, and Justicia para los Migrantes poster, banner. And we went to the other side, and at first we stood up high and aimed our banners at the bridge, at where people were crossing, so they could see us. But then we decided that we, at least I had this thought that it wasn't kind of an intimate enough situation for us to be in, to be interactive with the situation. We were a bit of a spectacle, but nobody came to us and said, hey, what a spectacle. So in our efforts to get noticed and also to get closer to the dynamics of what was going on there, we went down to the banks of the river on the Mexican side, and we walked along there until the concrete path turned to a dirt path. And then we walked along the bank a little further until we were right opposite the place where they were launching the boats that basically laid claim to these few miles of the Rio Grande. And they really do have pretty good control of the Rio Grande for those few miles. And that's one of the things, of course, that makes it a showpiece as opposed to a real thing. That it's only a few miles, that people can go to some other place and cross. In fact, later we did manage to see people who had crossed. But the stuff that really sticks with me, the stuff that would stick with anyone, anybody who saw it, I believe would see it for the rest of their lives, was in an intimate place, 50 yards from this scene. We saw a family, 2 men, 2 women, a 10-year-old child. One of the women, probably 8 months pregnant, go to the gate of the boat ramp from which Operation Lone Star launches its boats, and basically that's its forward position on the river. We saw them go along, wending their way through the water, wading carefully through the water because some of the concertina wire slips down into it, and trying to avoid getting caught on the concertina wire on the bank. So making their slow way along and finally reaching the gate that's closed and guarded by the National Guard from Texas and several other states, the Texas military. Texas is the only state in the country with a military. It's a descendant of the Texas Rangers. And That's where they set up. This family came along and begged to be allowed in. They were tired. They were thirsty, and they asked to be allowed in. And we stood there. We had megaphones. We called out. We screamed. We ripped our vocal cords screaming at the people on the other side who brought themselves somehow to give them a couple of bottles of water, but would not let them in. They stayed for a while, pressed their case. We could see them arguing. We were able to talk to them, to ask them where they were from. They were Ecuadorian. We watched as the soldiers were begged for mercy. And we watched them limit their mercy to a few bottles of water and the direction, the instruction to keep walking, just keep going. We're not letting you in here. And eventually that family, maybe you can show those pictures, Carla, of the family on the bank, if you can find that one. And maybe you can find a picture later of them walking along, having been turned down. We saw that. And while we were there, we didn't get to see much crossing. You know, crossing either takes place in the dark or outside of the range of this very limited operation. Crossing happens. We know that it happens because wet people show up at the shelters in Eagle Pass. But these people, again, faced the soldiers, asked for mercy, and were denied, and left all of us, our hands shaking and our souls trembling a little bit. A couple of days earlier, I managed to, with the help of America and her father, arrange for a trip to the spot where the buoys are in the river, where they put those buoys with the saw blades in between. Lee and Carla and I went there on the American side, and we were thwarted by apparently members of the U.S. Army, who explained to us that the woman whose property runs along the river there had asked for protection against, I think, press. I think press was the main thing, in exchange for allowing the Border Patrol to operate on her property. So they were there to protect the property against us. We noted, though, that there were Operation Lone Star people driving by on a kind of a lower road near the river, so they weren't blocking them; they were just blocking us. This picture that you see now is that family at the gate there, asking to get in. Anyway, I went to that. We arranged with a reporter, a Mexican reporter, who knew the people who owned the land. You're going back. You can go back to the buoys now. I think there we go. They arranged for us to go on that land. The land apparently is controlled by coyotes, and coyotes. I think everybody knows what coyotes are, but I'll say it anyway. Those are the people that charge for getting you across the river to one extent or another. Usually costing about $6,000 to get to the other side per person. Sometimes more if the trip involves getting them past the border patrol checkpoints that are everywhere along the southern border. Anyway, he arranged for us to go on the Mexican side, on the Piedras Negras side. He drove us over there, and we were walking in there and looking at those buoys. A couple of things about the buoys. I see I'm talking way too long. I won't say a couple of things about the buoys. There are saw blades in them, and they say they're not. I just want to show you one more thing before I turn this over to somebody else who has, people have other things, important things to say. The sign that I found on the Mexican bank there. Every few feet is a sign.
I'm looking for it, sorry.
That's okay, you look for it. And the sign, that was a friend, there we are. For those who don't speak Spanish, I'll translate as best I can. This was on the Mexican side, Mexican bank. We don't know who put it there. It says danger. In this part of the river, you can get trapped. There are discs that cut, and you can see in the decal there, the blade, the saw blade, and a person swimming. It says, personas han muerto. People have died. Look for another way, please. And this was on that side, on the Mexican side of the river. You can't get to the other side of the river. Obviously, this is to discourage people from trying to cross there. Frankly, it's not the hardest place to cross. You can go around the buoys. The buoys are only run for about 1,000 feet. But this obviously is put up to discourage, to scare, and it is pretty scary. And now I should stop talking. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go to America next because I'm not sure how long we're going to have her with us. Since she is on the road. And America, I want you to talk to us or ask you about, you live in Eagle Pass, and some of us were there for just a couple of days. Some of us were there for the full 15-day vigil. And we got to see a very small amount of what happens in Eagle Pass. Can you talk to us about what are your daily challenges as a resident of Eagle Pass dealing with Operation Lone Star and all that is currently happening in Eagle Pass?
Thank you, Carla. I appreciate that. And I'm really glad that y'all came down. Having witnessed at the border in Eagle Pass was just a jolt of energy. And the affirmations, we met often for breakfast. The affirmations we received each day, this is outrageous. This is unbelievable. I can't believe this is happening. That was really encouraging in the work that the Eagle Pass Border Coalition is doing, and also the Border Vigil of Eagle Pass. So we really appreciated having you here and having that. In answer to your question about what are the daily challenges, none. This is not something that is happening. This is a show that is happening on Shelby Park. And we had, in March, we had over 20 immigration advocates who work with worldwide migration. And they've been in war-torn nations around the world. And one of the things that struck me listening to hear him talk was when they talked about what a true war zone was like, and how people walked around with a helmet in their hand because they weren't sure if there was going to be mortar fire. The level of anxiety that everybody had at all times. And in Eagle Pass, we don't have that experience. And that's because this is happening. It is a show. It is political theater that is designed to increase the number of votes. And we're seeing it play out across a national stage because Governor Abbott found a solution that's working for him and his party, and other governors around the nation are picking up on that, and they're going with that. And so when a bill was presented that had everything that they had ever asked for, they turned their nose up and they walked away, because the problem that they are creating is far more valuable to them than the solution. At this point in time, we're seeing $11 billion have been spent by the state of Texas. And that money would have been life-changing for residents of my border community, Eagle Pass, and all of the other border communities, if they'd been invested in education, in infrastructure, in industry, in so many different areas. But instead, that money comes to the border in the form of payments to National Guard, payments to Department of Public Safety, payments to contractors for constructing a $400 million forward operating base. And the money doesn't actually stay in Eagle Pass. You don't see homes being purchased. You don't see vehicles being purchased. You don't see families growing up in Eagle Pass. Instead, the governor is perpetuating the largest theft of public funds that Texas has ever seen. And every single bit of it would be illegal, except that he's declared it a disaster. So in answer to your question, we're seeing this theft play out in real time. And we're seeing the play actors dressed up in their uniforms, carrying weapons, which they usually do not do during their operations, turn us away from our places of recreation, turn us away from our parks, turn us away from the good fishing spots, turn us away from the places in our community that are very near and dear to our culture and our heritage. So, for example, we have a festival called the International Friendship Festival. And it actually used to begin in Piedras Negras, Mexico, come across the First International Bridge into Eagle Pass, and then end down in Shelby Park. And, you know, many things changed in 2001. The parade now begins in the United States, but for years we have had hundreds of school children and groups join us from Piedras Negras. They basically would get a day pass that was issued by Customs and Border Patrol, and they were allowed to come into Eagle Pass, march in the parade, and see what it was like to be in community with us, and then go back at the end of the day. This year, for the first time, Customs and Border Patrol did not allow them to come in because they were concerned that SB 4 might be in operation, and that these students, these band members, these dancers might end up, they would be a public relations nightmare. And so they decided not to let them come over into the country in the first place. And so, you know, I grew up watching ballet folklorico dancers and all kinds of groups right in the heart of my community, but the children of today don't get that experience. We are no longer able to have our carnivals. We're no longer able to have our concerts in the places that we've had. But more than that, it's made it very hard for us to go visit family members and to go visit the institutions on both sides of the river that we've done for years. And that is directly attributable to Operation Lone Star and to the way that immigration is being mismanaged, especially in Texas, but also by the United States. And these are things that are happening incrementally, and people say, okay, well, this year we don't get to go see you know, our family. This year we don't get to go at Christmas. This year, next year it'll change. And then a year goes by and it gets worse and it gets worse. And so kind of like the frogs in a pot of boiling water, we're seeing the temperature get turned up, and we have less and less, you know, that we can call our own, that we can look to with pride, fewer touchstones of our culture and our heritage that are still available to reach out and to touch. One of the biggest concerns to me in Eagle Pass is that when concertina wire was first put up on the Rio Grande with the beginning of Operation Lone Star in 2021, very few people complained about that. Very few people raised a hue and cry about the situation. And so 3 years later, the governor of Texas went and did the same thing. And he put it around the golf course. We had Humvees sitting on our golf course. We have concertina wire on Main Street, inside the city limits, no longer on the Rio Grande. It's around our golf course. It's around our parks. It's inside Eagle Pass. And my concern is that if we allow these things to continue to grow the way they are, to continue to go unchecked, it will happen up and down the border. It will happen in other communities because people will say, oh, we must protect ourselves. And we're going to have an allergic response to something that's actually beneficial to us. So that I would say is the biggest concern I have and the biggest problem that we have with Operation Lone Star.
Thank you, America. I hope you can stay with us for the Q&A. but please drive safe. And I'm gonna turn to Lee now. And Lee, I'm gonna ask you the same question. Can you reflect on your time in Eagle Pass? And now that you've been home, what do you keep thinking about?
I had the experience of seeing the same things that Josh is talking about, America's talking about. And on one level, it all seemed like what we've seen before. But several days after I got home, I realized something was bothering me and I couldn't put my finger on it. And at some point, I realized that we had seen things that might have significance beyond what they seem to have. And specifically, I started thinking in terms of what does it mean that you had not just the Texas National Guard and the Texas Guard, but the US Army, the regular US Army, and you had military National Guard units there from Louisiana and from any number of other states there. And it wasn't at all clear what it meant. So today, some of you have seen the post I put up on Facebook. Think about what it might mean. My experience, I practiced law. I had a lot of contact with police officers over the years. Is policing and I believe military of various sorts, they have sort of a feeling of camaraderie, of commonality and mission, of all being in it together. You see this when they show up in mass for each other's funerals. You see it when you visit a police station and they've always got the patches of the other police stations that they visited from other parts of the country. And I realized we have now got the phenomena in Eagle Pass of bringing military forces, National Guard units from all over the country, and I'll get back to in a minute what it really means, and they're working together on a common mission. So it's not just that they're getting to know each other, they all have the feeling that we are pursuing this same goal, and they're going out on night patrols, and they're coming back with stories about how we stopped the invasion of the migrants. So you've got a buy-in, I believe. And those of us who have worked in any number of jobs, corporate jobs, you'll find the same thing. You get put on a task force, and all of a sudden you find you're all thinking along the same lines. So I'm concerned that what we have is a phenomenon of spreading an attitude about migrants to parts of the country that would have up until now simply looked at it as a Texas problem or a border problem. What's particularly concerning about this to me is when I started digging into and graphing out where are these units coming from, basically it kind of looks like it's the old Confederate Army is reconstituted itself, because these are red states. They are largely southern states. They're virtually all, just about all states with Republican governors. But I think it's much more than just politics. We saw on when the insurrection was going on that the president did not call in the forces that he had available to him to quash the insurrection. Well, let's think about the fact that now we have a governor of Texas who may very well be able to put his control over, or at least reach out to and have contact with militarized forces from all around the country who never had this kind of a common mission before that I'm aware of. You know, these National Guards usually respond to floods and hurricanes. They're usually out there rescuing people, handing out blankets, doing good things. It's really quite rare in our history that we've had them doing an actual military style mission before. So I realized when I got back that we had seen something that may be not that significant, or it may actually have enormous significance long into the future as these people bring back the tales of what they have been taught and they were shown is actually an invasion. They were made to feel that they were threatened, that they were under fire, and they will bring those stories back. So when we go out and we do our witnessing, I think it's like an awful lot of scientists. You do your research, you go expecting to see certain things, and then you have to discipline yourself to make sure that the things you're seeing, you're not you're not interpreting just because of what you expected. And I found on this trip that I'd seen something that could have a very significant meaning. So it was a matter of just having seen something and then letting it percolate down, and that to me was frankly a somewhat terrifying experience.
Thank you, Lee. Julie, I'm gonna put you in the spotlight now, and ask you to ask you the same question. Now that you've been home and you were the witness that was there for the longest period of time, you got there early and you were the last to leave. You've been home for almost 2 weeks. What are your reflections, and what's keeping you up at night, and what do you keep thinking about?
There's so much. It just goes around in a lot of circles. And it's taken this almost 2 weeks for things to really start sinking in. But besides what Josh talked about, which I think has probably stayed with all of us that were there the most, seeing these desperate people. That's been very big and on my mind. Also, while I was there, I guess it sunk in a little more each day how bizarre it was. And walking across the bridge, because we couldn't see anything on the US side, and we would talk to people that were also crossing the bridge, and how do you feel about this? And nobody, it's like, we don't understand. And the times we got to talk through a fence to a guard or two, they don't know. I don't know, they were not really sure why they're there, except I think some said we're the eyes and ears. But being on the other side and walking through this beautiful plaza and down this paseo along the river, where people were fishing, dads bringing their little boys. We watched learning how to cast a rod, and people swimming. And then look to the other side where the people of Eagle Pass can't go down to their side of the river. They can't go into their park. And that has bothered me a lot. It's not right. It's unbelievable. And the things that have been put in place there are deadly. The wires, under the water in some places, depending on the river levels. That bothered me a lot. What I've come home to think about more and more is the environmental damage to the river, the damage to people crossing, the damage to people that are put there to guard from other states. In this sector, there is a mental health crisis that I have read about, suicide rates and depression. And it really bothers me for people who probably don't know what they signed up for there. And just the degradation to the riverfront on the Eagle Pass side. The airboats going up and down the river constantly and spewing whatever they spew out the back. All of that was disturbing. And then we made a little trip out to what we heard about, the 80-acre camp that was being constructed to house all these.
And I'm going to share some pictures of that.
Oh, yes, please. These are to house National Guard from all over the United States. It has cost millions already, will cost $1 million more. We made it there long enough to get a picture of their sign to Camp Eagle. We saw portable buildings piled up that would go in place. Kind of a barren area that it's in. We also noticed there's a waste treatment plant right by it, and a cement plant right by it, and a very dusty Caliche Road leading out to it. And all of those things were very concerning because of the health hazards that go along with them. So we started digging a little bit, and I've been looking up information, found out that Texas, because they're acting on their own, under what they call an emergency or disaster, do not have to have environmental permits to do this construction. They aren't, there's no oversight of their use of the river, the containers. Environmental people have said that it's causing erosion along the banks. There's a risk that they could slide into the river and pollute the river with the rust and the whatever contents might be in them. So that's something that we're looking at to see what, what can we do about it? What can we say about it? How can that change? But it's, it's hard to process all of this because it is like nothing I've ever seen in the some years that I've been going to places along the border. And we were really fortunate to meet America and the people that she works with there, and I hope we can find ways to still work with them and to help. So we just want people to know what's happening there. So thanks.
Thank you, Julie. I'm going to bring the rest of the panel members back onto the screen, and we're going to open it up for questions. So if you have questions, probably the easiest thing is going to be to put them in the chat. And there's America right there.
Oh, I did want to say that I put in the chat, there was an article that just came out in The Guardian by a man named Michael Gonzalez, and he did a wonderful article on Eagle Pass, and he was there at the time we were. So a lot of his observations are really good reading and real informative.
Thank you, Julie. So Lee, while we're waiting for our first question to come in, while you all were in Eagle Pass on March 22nd, you organized and held a Passover Seder in Shelby Park. You got access to the park, and which is the area that's been taken over by the National Guard. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? And while you're talking, I'll try to share some pictures from that event.
Well, just briefly, I was hesitant to do anything of a religious nature because ours isn't a religious group, but I happened to be there and we're supposed to observe. So we observed and invited everyone. Turned out there were people from any number of different religious persuasions with us. The story of Passover is a story of people who were not free and then became free and then were allowed to migrate and spent, if you believe the story, 40 years wandering in the desert. But to me, that story we've been telling for a long time now. To me, what really made an impression was the picture you're seeing on the screen. And that was being down in that space, knowing that we were allowed to be there, and so many people, basically the people whose town it is, are not allowed to be there. We were allowed to be there for a couple of hours. We had special permission. And there's this very strange feeling. It's like, I suppose people have gone to different resort locations, and sometimes you're behind walls with barbed wire and glass on the top, and sometimes there's armed guards, and you can either look out and say what a beautiful place this is, or you can look around and say, how is it that I'm allowed to be here and all these other people are not? And that really was, it made an impression on me to think this used to be, not, as America said not long ago, this was a city park, and now it is a place that for no good reason has been taken away. And it's a beautiful place and we love being there, but we couldn't shake the idea, at least I couldn't shake the idea that this was a special, a privilege, which we certainly didn't deserve and hadn't earned, but I think we all learned from it. So it was a wonderful experience to be there with people.
Thank you, Lee, for sharing that. We do have a question. Someone is asking, can someone explain why the US government, she has Navy in parentheses, hasn't come in to take down the deplorable stuff on the river? Who wants to address that? America, do you want to talk to that?
So, yeah, we have spent a lot of time speculating as to why the US government has not done that, and we don't have a good reason. I do know that the current administration holds the rule of law in very high esteem. They have filed a number of lawsuits against the state of Texas. The Department of Justice has filed a number of lawsuits. So I don't know. I will say that there have been a number of times where what we have done with the Eagle Pass Border Vigil feels like we're just exciting the state of Texas. We're just giving them something for their fans to bite into. That they like the fear, they like the outrage, and so I wonder sometimes if what we're seeing is just kind of a gray face. We're going to let the courts do their job, and that's what they're doing. I don't know. I also know that the Biden administration has asked numerous times, not just in the bill that was turned down, but through pretty much every option they've had. They've asked for additional personnel for Border Patrol, for asylum processors, for more asylum judges, for every person that they have. They've asked for more money for DNA testing and things of that sort. And our current Republican controlled Congress has turned them down over and over and over again. But I know that kind of as an insider because we're tracking the requests and everything else. I don't feel that that message has gotten out to the rest of the country. So I don't have a good answer. But yes, I mean, the US government could shut this down in a heartbeat if they wanted to. But Governor Abbott has found a pressure point, and by putting his thumb on Eagle Pass, he has sent cracks through our entire union. And I think that the federal government is very aware of these cracks and is doing what they can not to exacerbate them anymore, but instead go through, like I said, the rule of law, go through the courts, push for more bills and such in order to address these issues. So Lee might actually have some additional thoughts on this that I've not been able to come up with.
No, actually, I could speculate for quite a while about what the politics are on it, but it would just be speculation.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, I'm willing to speculate. I'm willing to speculate because I think it's fairly obvious that the Republicans' big issue in the upcoming election is indeed migrants, which have been turned into villains in the media and in government circles. And the Democrats are really not doing a very good job of resisting that characterization. They're not doing the work of talking about how much we depend on migrants, how much our economy needs migrants, et cetera, et cetera. But the Republicans have this pressure point, like you characterized it, America, and the Republicans are holding this over Biden. Biden doesn't want to do anything that brings attention to the border. There's some speculation that he may do something that makes things really worse for migrants at the border. Certainly, if that bill were to pass, it would be a dreadful thing to happen, even with hiring more Border Patrol officers for the largest police force in the world. I would chalk it up to cynicism with the possibility that Biden doesn't really care very much about migrants. That I can't say for sure. That's speculation, but I'm pretty sure that politically it's a hot potato for him. He doesn't want it to heat up. If we can go back to Frog, he's absolutely doesn't want the temperature to rise. I hate to tell him though that the frogs are already cooked and ready to eat as soon as we get the right sauce.
So the next question we have is relates to the population of Eagle Pass, and a couple people have asked the question in a couple different ways, but basically, what percentage of Eagle Pass residents support Governor Abbott and Operation Lone Star? And what's percentage of the population sort of connects the dots and sees things the way like that you do, America?
So that's a really good question. And I don't have a good answer for you. I know the town is very much, split. It's hard to say if it's 50-50 or not, because we have, in Eagle Pass, our voter turnout tends to hover below 40% and at times below 30%. So of the people that do vote, it's fairly evenly split. But we've got so many people that don't vote, it's hard to tell where they fall. So I don't know. I can tell you anecdotally, we have a number of people who are in mixed status families, and they don't say anything. Their reaction to the phrase, I came the right way, is just to get quieter and quieter and quieter, and kind of try to be anywhere but in view of the rest of the world. Of course, I counter that every time I hear that, to say that, claiming asylum is an internationally protected right. I've been using the term safety seekers and people on the move, because that does take away some of the knee-jerk reactions, the programmed reactions that we're starting to see more and more often. And you start to think about, like, oh yeah, they're trying to live. But in answer to your question, I don't have a really good sense, because we have so many people that are silent, and with good reason. There are a lot of people with a lot to lose, with the current situation the way it is. Eagle Pass is economically depressed, and to have a job, with benefits. Our number one employer is Eagle Pass Independent School District, which depends very, very heavily on the grant from the state of Texas. Our number two employer is the government. Yeah, there are a lot of folks who are afraid to say anything. In fact, we had a newspaper article where just people being in attendance at an event were mentioned. And I got a call saying, who gave this name? That shouldn't have been in the paper. That could have job repercussions for the people who were present. So that's the kind of situation we're in. We are not independent, and we're so far, from everything else, that it can be really hard for folks to be able to talk about what's going on here.
I heard that when I was there from yourself and others, that immigrants coming through Eagle Pass isn't people's number one worry. That their number one worry is more jobs and water, is what I heard. Jobs and water are our biggest concerns. The next question we have is, are the ports of entry open for asylum seekers in Eagle Pass? Who wants to take that relative to like CBP 1 and seen people cross? And
I could speak to that. What we were told when we were there, bridge number 2 is a port of entry. There's a CBP station there, and people with the CBP 1 app that have an appointment can come there. And we were fortunate enough to see a group of people that had been released when we were holding our vigil by that bridge one evening. So it was good to see people walking out with papers in hand and on their way to a shelter. As far as someone was told, who was doing some research, that it had been so slow that CBP was accepting people at the bridge that didn't have an appointment. But
No.
Yeah, then I heard another side of that. Do you want to explain that, America? That's what this person was told by CBP.
Yeah, I can't see that happening. So there are 30 appointments in the morning and 30 appointments in the afternoon. But I mean, I can't see that happening, but please, Julie, go on. That's fascinating.
I know, I thought it was really odd, and then somebody else said, no, they would never get past the group on the Mexican side.
Mhm.
Even
Yes.
try that. CBP might have
Yeah.
said it, but the people aren't going to get to them. And what was the other
Yeah.
part of the question? Sorry, I forgot.
That
Um,
was it. Are the ports of
Yeah.
entry open for assignment? And
Right.
just to clarify for people who aren't familiar with Eagle Pass, there are two bridges. Bridge 1 is the bridge that comes right into downtown Eagle Pass and is it's a car and pedestrian bridge. And Bridge 2 is a little bit east of the downtown of Eagle Pass, and that's more of a car bridge, and that's where the CBP offices are, and where migrants are processed and allowed to cross at Bridge 2. So
Mhm. Yeah.
I would add that the anti-migrant work, most of it, in fact, is being done inside of Mexico. But by the time people get to the border, there are things there to slow them down and stop them, and we know
Yeah.
that some of those things are going on, and I really want to emphasize this. And some of those things are quite deadly.
Yes.
People are because of this. It's not all show business, but the reason it's slow, the migration is slow there, is what Mexico is doing, which is keeping people off buses, flying people back to southern Mexico, busing them back to southern Mexico, and keeping them basically from getting to Piedras Negras. So the traffic of migrants has slowed down considerably thanks to the cooperation of between Mexico and the United States to stop people. That's an example of that is, for instance, the CBP can say, yeah, we'll take people on the bridge, but of course Mexico won't let them on the bridge. We were asked by Mexican authorities before we got to the bridge to go back, are you American citizens? In other words, they're stopping people before they even get onto the bridge. And we've seen that in Matamoros, we've seen that in Reynosa, we've seen that in other places where Mexico is stepping in there and saying you can't get on the bridge. Mexico is a very, very strong partner to the anti-immigrant forces in this country.
And Tom cleared up that Grupo Enlace, am I saying that right, America? Part of the government, local government in PA, there's screens, and we were screened before we got onto the bridge until they recognized us after a few days. Go, hi, go on. And then also,
Belinda is saying that
Okay.
the shelter on the Eagle Pass side is averaging 2 buses a day from CBP with 20 people on each bus. So 40 people a day with an average stay at the shelter of 3 days.
which we kind of saw when we were there, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And those are people who are not getting across the so-called proper way. These are people who've arrived wet, a lot of them.
Yeah. I will add something that's happened since last year. So unfortunately, Josh and Lee did not have the chance to take a canoe ride down the Rio Grande with Epi's Canoe and Kayaks. Jesse is an outfitter. But I was able to do so last week, actually going on 2 weeks ago now. The last couple of trips that Jesse had in the month of March, he had multiple trips where they did not see anybody on the river. And then also some trips where we saw some folks that were in really bad shape. On this trip that we had about 10 days ago, we saw about 20 people total over the course of 8 miles. But what really struck me was that in the past, when we've reached out to those folks and said, hey, where are you from? Where are you going? People were quite proud to say, I'm from Venezuela, I'm from Ecuador. And they would tell us how long they had been on the road. They would tell us what time they entered the river. We've actually stopped and had the media that we were with interview these different asylum seekers and people on the move at length, and they would tell their entire stories. We've also had some that would share their story but would not show their face, would only use a first name, things of that sort. What struck me on this April trip was that the people would not answer us, or they would give us very oblique answers. Oh, I came from over there. I left this morning. I'm going over there. They were much more secretive. They were not interested in talking to our photographer, you know, with his big camera and everything else. And what we've been talking about is that for this group to make it to Eagle Pass, they would have had to dodge all kinds of checkpoints and all kinds of patrols. In Piedras Negras, we have the Mexican National Guard that are patrolling the riverbank. I don't know how often you saw them, Julie, but they patrol regularly along the riverbank. And so for this group to make it to where they were, they'd had to be very, very evasive. And we saw that in their behavior while we were on the river drifting past them.
Okay, we don't have any more questions in the chat, and we're right at just past, we're at 6:01 p.m. Before I switch to Sarah, she's going to talk to us about her upcoming book. Josh, could you close out for us on this discussion and talk about the workshop for justice south of the border? We haven't actually named it yet, but that's an idea that we have on the table. And if you could share a little bit about that idea with everybody who's online, and then I will go to.
Sure. I mean, as I said before, we crossed the border for the first time to hold a vigil on the other side. It's kind of in the direction of what was advised to us at the Ajo conference. Two things people seem to agree on was that we should go to Eagle Pass, and we did. And the other thing was we should go to where the borders are. And as we've been talking about, and it's come up a couple of times in the discussion, Mexico is a big part of what constitutes the American border. So here's the idea. The idea is that we hold a conference, like the workshop in Ajo, but this time in southern Mexico, not too far from the border between Mexico and Guatemala, not too far from Tapachula, in a place called San Cristobal de las Casas. We're thinking about doing that next spring, and at this point, it's in the very, very early stages. It's in the speculation stages. So help us speculate, please, by letting us know one way or another, email, text messages, however, whether that idea appeals to you. We'd like to do it, but we need to make it feasible. We need to know, do we have enough people to make that kind of a critical mass? And what kind of space do we have to plan for? Kind of time do we have to plan for? So let us know if you're interested. That's our little what next at the moment, which may turn into a big what next if we find enough people interested in doing it. I know I'm very interested in doing it.
Thank you, Josh. And now I want to turn to Sarah. And Sarah, as I mentioned at the beginning of the event today, has a soon-to-be released book, Crossing the Line, Finding America in the Borderlands, and she's going to talk just a little bit about that.
Thank you, Carla. And first, thanks to all of you for your tremendous witness and for taking the time and feeding back to us what you saw there at Shelby Park. It's so nice to meet you, America. And what I'd like to just catch you all up on, I think a lot of you know that I've been working on this book since January 2020 when I was at the Vigil in Matamoros. It's finally coming out and in multiple formats, and there's an opportunity, borrowing from the words of our friends Marjorie and Chuck, who are both on this call, as they've said that they're excited to use the book to bring their border experiences home to their friends and communities north of the 100-mile checkpoint in a tangible way, to be able to share experiences such as y'all have been sharing tonight with folks who maybe haven't been compelled or motivated to get to the border yet, but we still might get them down there. The book launches in June 18th, and on June 18th, and thanks to Chuck and Marjorie and Deirdre, who's on the call, Camilo and other people, I have now got a national tour that seems to be growing from launch day to election day. We've got events coming up in San Francisco, LA, Ann Arbor, Detroit, DC, New York City, Dallas, Fort Worth, also thanks to Karen Levitt, who I don't think is on the call. And in El Paso today, I just got an invitation thanks to the Carbon Trace crew and some other friends in Springfield to come to Missouri. So I'm reaching out to appeal to all of you with a couple of options. It's not just about selling my book, right? It's about getting the word out and raising awareness, countering the narrative that is now prevailing because of yahoos like Greg Abbott and the mainstream media not pushing back. I'm really keen to get into places where there are voters who could be persuaded. So I would love if any of you are keen to join this burgeoning book tour dream team and help me get into your town, into your libraries. At this point, I'm speaking at retirement communities, libraries, bookstores, congregations of all denominations, just, cafes. I got a couple open mics at some cafes. The sky's the limit. It doesn't have to be limited to bookstores. So I'm putting in the chat here a link to where the events are so far, so you can kind of see what's happening and where I'll be when. If you're interested in having me come to your town, just reach out. There's a contact form there. If that seems like too much, there's other things you could do. We, if you're in a book club, pitch the book to be read by your book club. That would be awesome. Book clubs are so expansive. Go to all the different stores in your community and ask them, are you carrying Crossing the Line? And if they say no, say, well, would you please? And maybe, buy one for a friend so that the stores will stock it on their shelves. Even more important is libraries. My understanding is if there are 3 people waiting for one book, they'll order it. If there are 3 more, they'll order another. So 9 people waiting for a book is 3 books in a library. But most importantly, right now, and I see people coming into the chat. I'm not able to read and talk at the same time. So if you're interested, please just, reach out to me via email, or you can get my email on the website. But most importantly right now, it would be so important that the day it launches, I have 50 reviews in Amazon. So today I am offering a free PDF of my book to all y'all so that you can read it and be ready to post a review on June 18th. Because if we get it up into wow, people are talking about this status, it'll start to get recommended and more and more people will buy it. You can post on Goodreads here. I'll put the links in. You can post on Goodreads at any time, but Amazon only from launch day. And my goal is to have 50 reviews on Amazon on launch day. Hopefully good ones. Obviously I want you to be honest, but the gooder the better. So thank you for listening, and thanks to all of you for your continued witness and continued attention to this issue. Let's get the word out. Let's get that word out. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for that. And we all look forward to reading your book and reviewing your book.
Thank you.
Thank you to everybody who joined us, whether it's afternoon or evening, your time. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. And we don't have another one on the books yet, but we will be working on that, and we look forward to your input on the idea of going to the southern part of Mexico for our next conference. The format would not be the same, but would be similar to what we did in Ajo in January. As Josh said, it's an idea at this point. We don't have a plan yet. So your input and your thoughts are very much welcome at this point. And again, thank you for your time, and see you next time.